Imagine waking up to find a bright yellow violation notice taped to your door. Except the violation is your own house color, the one you personally chose, approved, and designed. Because you're the architect who created the entire neighborhood's design plan. Yeah. That's the kind of morning I had when Karen from the HOA decided my house was suddenly out of compliance. I knew Karen. Everyone knew Karen. She had the uncanny ability to materialize out of thin air whenever someone's grass grew half an inch too long or a garden gnome dared to exist. But this was bold, even for her. I stood there on my porch, holding the notice like it was a ticket to some absurd alternate universe. According to her, the warm slate gray of my siding was unauthorized. Funny, because I was the one who wrote the color guidelines. Literally. My name was on the documents. At first, I honestly thought it was a joke. Maybe a prank from a neighbor who knew what I did for a living. But nope. Karen showed up 30 minutes later with a clipboard, sunglasses, and the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. She informed me that unless I repainted my house to match the approved palette, I'd be facing fines. I let her finish her entire rehearsed speech before I told her who I was, or at least who she should have known I was. Because I wasn't just a guy who lived in the neighborhood, I was the architect who designed the entire community layout. The houses, the colors, the materials, the landscaping flow, all of it. The HOA guidelines? She was quoting my work back to me, incorrectly. Her expression didn't change at first. She blinked twice and said, "Well, regardless, the board agrees your house looks off." Off. She said off about a color palette I'd spent 6 months perfecting. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about power. And she had just tried to flex it on the person with the actual blueprint receipts. But instead of snapping back, I decided to play along, to let her dig the hole deeper. After all, if Karen wanted a battle over house colors, she was about to learn that I was not the neighbor to pick a fight with. Little did I know the whole thing was about to escalate far beyond paint swatches, thanks to her daughter, my cows, and a manure loader. And trust me, if there's one thing I've learned from years of building neighborhoods, it's that the smallest disputes can explode into the wildest stories, especially when strong personalities collide in ridiculous ways no one expects. Where Karen poured gasoline on the situation, completely by accident, of course. Because while Karen was busy trying to micromanage my exterior paint, her teenage daughter, Lily, was busy doing what teenagers do best, taking selfies. Unfortunately for her, the backdrop she picked was my pasture, which just so happened to contain my very curious herd of cows. Now, my cows are harmless. Big, goofy, grass-munching sweethearts who think every human must be holding snacks. Lily, however, approached the fence with the confidence of someone who believed farm animals behaved like stuffed plushies from the mall. She leaned in, stretched out her arm, and began snapping pictures while the cows crowded behind her like paparazzi with horns. I didn't mind. Honestly, it was adorable. But Karen? Oh, Karen was furious. She marched onto my property without knocking, waving her clipboard like a sword. She demanded to know why her daughter had been forced to take selfies with livestock that ruined her feed aesthetic. Apparently, cows were too rustic for Lily's social media brand. I tried to stay polite. Truly. I told her Lily was welcome to take as many pictures as she wanted, as long as she stayed on the safe side of the fence. But Karen wasn't really upset about the cows. She was still hung up on the non-existent paint violation, and she clearly thought escalating every tiny detail would intimidate me into repainting. Spoiler, it wouldn't. That's when the situation took a turn from mildly annoying to delightfully ridiculous. The next afternoon, I was loading manure into the compost trailer using my small front-end loader. It wasn't glamorous, but it needed doing. That's when I spotted Lily again, back at the fence. She wasn't sneaking around, just trying to get a few harmless pictures with the cows lined up behind her. Karen wasn't with her. The cows were behaving. Everything was peaceful. And then Lily lifted her phone, angling it perfectly, just as I rumbled into the background with the manure loader raised like a trophy. I didn't plan it. I genuinely didn't. But the timing was so perfect, the universe practically demanded I lean into it. I gave a cheerful little wave, the kind a theme park mascot might give children on a parade float. Lily froze, then burst out laughing so loudly the cows backed away in surprise. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't mocking. It was just funny, really funny. Even she thought so. But when Keran found out, oh, she did not think it was funny, and that's when everything truly started to unravel. Keran stormed up my driveway that evening like she was marching into a courtroom where she was both judge and jury. She didn't bother knocking, just launched into a speech that sounded memorized, dramatic, and fueled entirely by secondhand outrage filtered through her daughter's retelling. According to Keran, my intentional disruption of Lily's photography session was unneighborly, immature, and, my personal favorite, a targeted act of agricultural intimidation. I honestly had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Agricultural intimidation? What did she think I was doing weaponizing compost? I explained calmly that Lily hadn't complained. In fact, she'd laughed, a lot. But Keran wasn't having it. She insisted I issue a formal apology to her daughter, repaint my house, and keep my farm equipment out of public view. That last part confused me, considering the loader was parked behind a barn. The only reason she'd seen it was because she'd marched onto my property again. I tried to reason with her. I reminded her that my house color was, quite literally, in compliance. I reminded her that the cows were fenced and harmless. I even reminded her that farms involve farm equipment, and that she moved next to one fully aware of that fact. But reason and Keran had never been properly introduced. She threatened fines. She threatened board meetings. At one point, she even threatened to report my cows for being too forward. I didn't know cows could violate anyone's personal space in a legal sense, but I guess we were discovering brand new HOA law together. Finally, she ended her tirade with a line delivered like the climax of a movie monologue. If you refuse to cooperate, I will escalate this to the full extent of the HOA's power. That's when I decided it was time for my own escalation, but mine would be polite, professional, and devastatingly factual. I told her gently that I would be happy to bring this to the HOA board. In fact, I encouraged it. Because sometimes the best way to end nonsense is to give it a microphone and let it implode. I said I would bring the architectural design documents, the original neighborhood plans, the HOA guideline drafts, every sheet with my signature already on them. For the first time all day, she hesitated. She muttered something about double-checking schedules and marched off, clearly rattled but pretending she wasn't. What neither of us knew was that the next board meeting would become the most chaotic event the neighborhood had ever seen. And it all started with a cow, a selfie, and one extremely persistent clipboard. And trust me, the surprises waiting at that meeting would leave even Keran struggling to maintain her composure. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and by the time I arrived, the room was already buzzing like a beehive struck by a broom handle. Everyone had heard rumors, house color disputes, cows, selfies, the infamous manure loader photobomb, and the neighborhood had shown up in full. Keran sat in the front row with her arms crossed, so tightly it looked like she was trying to fold herself in half. Her daughter sat beside her, looking like she wanted to melt through the floor rather than live through another minute of the drama her mother had created. The board asked me to speak first, expecting, judging by their faces, some sort of apology or explanation. Instead, I placed a thick binder on the table, opened it, and slid out the original architectural documents. I explained, calmly and professionally, that I had been the lead architect for the entire development. I showed the approved color palettes, my palettes. I showed the HOA guideline drafts, my drafts. I showed signed documents confirming approvals, processes, and intentions that had shaped the neighborhood since its inception. As I spoke, board members leaned forward, eyebrows raised, flipping through pages. Keran's expression shifted from confident to confused to unmistakably panicked. When the board realized Keran had tried to enforce a rule against the person who had literally written the rule book. Things began to unravel quickly. One board member gently asked why she hadn't checked the source documents. Another asked why she had issued violation notices without verification. A third asked whether she had entered my property without permission, which caused the entire room to murmur. Keran tried to defend herself, claiming I was intentionally disruptive, but the board wasn't interested in vague accusations. They wanted facts, and the facts weren't on her side. Meanwhile, Lily quietly admitted the cow. Selfies weren't a problem, and that the photobomb had been funny. That earned a laugh from half the room, which only made Keran's frustrations simmer hotter. In the end, the board dismissed the violation, issued a formal reminder about verifying complaints, and suggested Keran step back from enforcement duties until procedural clarity improved. That was the polite way of saying she needed a timeout. After the meeting, neighbors approached me with relieved smiles, thanking me for handling everything with patience rather than escalating the chaos. Even Lily came over, apologizing for the stress, and showing me the now infamous photobomb picture, which had actually become one of her most liked posts. As for Keran, she left quietly for the first time ever, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a flag lowered in surrender. And just like that, the house color saga ended, not with repainting, but with truth, cows, and one perfectly timed manure loader cameo. Enjoying this wild HOA saga? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next neighborhood story twist. If this one made you laugh, drop a like, and tell me in the comments, what's the most bizarre HOA moment you've ever seen?